Hey y'all, Texas Beekeeper here. Today I'm going to inspect this colony and just kind of give some beginner tips on what you might want to look for while you're going into a colony. Okay, so the first thing is it's always good to look in front of the hive and just kind of make sure you don't see anything unusual. Wax cappings on the landing board could mean your colony got robbed out. Dead bees could mean they got robbed out. Here's an actual dead bumblebee, so that indicates that they put up a little bit of a struggle with a bumblebee, but I don't see a lot of dead honeybees, so that looks okay. A lot of bearding on the front could indicate that it's hot and humid, in which case you may want to crack the lid a little bit, give them some ventilation. You know, just take a glance and compare it to your other colonies also. Like when I look at neighboring colonies, they look pretty much the same. Not a lot going on. So that's one thing, is always inspect the front entrance of your hive. So I'm going to crack the lid now. I'm going to look on the underside of the lid and just make sure our queen's not there. And I don't see her, so that looks good. Not a big deal if she is, you just want to try to return her back to the colony safely. Alright. So this is some pollen sub that I had put on for them. And I'm going to inspect it, looking for small hive beetle larvae. I don't see any of that in here, so that looks good. If it was infested with small hive beetle larvae, I would probably throw it out. There is a larva right there, one, so definitely not bad. We have minimal problems with small hive beetles at this location, and I believe it's just the rocky soil. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and skip the top. Well, I'll do some of these inside frames just to show. But basically why I was gonna skip it, it's just there's not a lot going on up here. And so I would gear this video towards, if you were a new beekeeper, you probably have a nuke that you just recently brought home and put into a 10 frame colony. So again, nothing really going on here. Just gonna set this off to the side. Made sure the queen wasn't on it. And now I'm gonna dig in a little further. Just use my hive tool. Okay. So what we have here is a frame that's partially drawn out with comb. So all the frames are gonna have comb on them. And this particular one has nectar. You can kind of see the glistening nectar, hopefully. So that's nectar that they've brought in or that I fed them. I did hit them with some sugar syrup the other day, and it's not capped yet because it's not quite yet dried out enough to their liking. They'll usually cap it once it's been brought down from the moisture content, and that's usually at 18.5 or lower. Okay, that one was sticking just a little bit. There's more comb, a lot of nectar, and more comb, a lot of nectar. And as you're going through these frames, just take note of the way you took them out, and you always want to, well, especially with brood, you want to put them back the way they came. Sometimes with comb they'll draw some out a little more than others, and it may interfere with the neighboring frame. So in that case, honey frames also you would want to pay attention to, because you could put one back that's protruding into the space of the neighboring one, and if you put it in wrong, it could squish some bees. So a lot of more nectar here. And same on this back side. So right now we're just feeding them back some sugar syrup to get them prepared for the winter. And so far they're storing it pretty good. There's more nectar. So that's pretty much it. From there on, there's not a lot of, nothing really going on. So I'm gonna just push these back the way they were, and we'll put this frame back in. Something like that, doesn't matter which way it goes. All right, push the frames together. I usually push them towards the feeder, or actually I usually push the feeder towards the frames. There we go. Otherwise you could get some thickly drawn out frames. So now I'm going to get into probably what most of you are going to have. And that's a colony of bees. Just going to lightly smoke them. They're not, they're not in any way being aggressive or anything. I just want to get them to get out of the way as much as possible. Just a light smoking. And you always want to pull from the side that has the least on it. So if I come over here, I've got comb here. This one may be empty, but it's right next to a bunch of comb. This side of this one has no comb, and then this one has no comb. So this is a perfect one to pull. As you can see, very little bees on it. Check for the queen. And we'll just put this to the side. And so if this colony had a little more time, they would start filling out the outsides with honey. That's usually where you'll find your food frames, is further out. And then as you get towards the center, you're going to get closer to your brood frames. And it's usually pollen right on the outside of the brood frames, and then brood in between that. And sometimes you'll see pollen, you'll see pollen and honey on brood frames. But, definitely once you, so this is all honey, some capped, but definitely once you start seeing pollen, that's an indication that the next one is going to be brood. Okay, so I'm going to keep going in towards the center. This is a colony that a lot of festooning going on. Festooning is when the bees kind of form ladders, hook together, and work on frames. They'll usually, ladder up hand in hand and start drawing out comb. So they are most likely putting more comb on this one. There's a lot of nectar here. So put that back in. So I don't expect yet to see brood. And this is also right after a honey flow for us. So we're in a dearth. And so the resources are slimmer right now. So you won't see quite as much comb building, and you won't see as much brood production. So here we do have some brood. And we didn't have the pollen that I was talking about. Could be some pollen on the other side. But so this is all capped brood here. And the capped brood is more of a sandpaperish look to it, and usually a darker tan. Sometimes it can be light, but as you can see here, that's some honey, and that's what we would call wet-capped honey. And it's basically just honey right up to the wax capping, so it makes it a little darker. I'll see if we have some dry capped honey. I may have already split or went past some, but I'll point that out if we get to it. Okay, and so in the brood there is some pollen, so that kind of makes up a little bit of for not finding the pollen frame. Because there is some mixed in there. Pollen sources are probably lower right now. I am feeding a pollen sub. That's the bag you saw on top. And then also mixed in is some nectar. A few of the cells have nectar in them. So they're kind of putting nectar where it doesn't necessarily belong. Up top, on the sides and up top, you'll usually find a band of nectar and pollen. And then when you see it mixed in with the brood, then that's just an indication that they don't have enough empty, drawn out comb to store the nectar. So they'll start putting it wherever they can. And you may think that's a good thing, but the more they store where the queen could be laying eggs, the less opportunity there is for the queen to expand the colony, because she'll have nowhere to lay. So that's another thing we're going to check, just to make sure that we can keep feeding. Okay, so here I've got a lot of honey, capped honey, real dark, and a little bit of brood on the outside, and then brood over here with honey on the outside. And then the inside is some milk brood, so you'll see probably some eggs on the outside, and then towards the middle is some young larvae. I don't know if you can see that. Okay. So we ripped open a little bit of comb that they had bridged over to the neighboring frame, and that's fine. I'll usually just leave that. Sometimes I'll shove it down on the outside. And so most of the larvae that we looked at here was really small, and I'm hoping we have some older larvae that I can show you, because once it does get older, so that's a lot more honey, and then there's some brood. Okay, so here we have a few cells of larvae that are older, And I'll try to show that on the camera. Just gonna blow to try to get them out of the way. And down there towards the bottom, if you see some larvae, it's a nice pearly white. And that's what you want to see. When you look at your larvae, you want to make sure it's a healthy, shiny white. You don't want it to be yellow or brown. Just, it should glisten a little bit. It should look wet almost. So if you see any of it, hopefully it's coming across in the camera. That larvae should be nice and white. And then what you see in the middle is all brood again, capped brood. And then outside's more wet capped honey. So you can see the difference between the honey and the brood. They're both dark in this case, but the honey is kind of waxy, more waxy looking than the brood, which looks like kind of like sandpaper. It's a very satin finish. And this is a very, very calm colony of bees. I really like the way they are. I'm going to try to move this comb out of the way. Oops. And we'll just grab it. We'll get sticky. So just moved it to the side. They're cleaning that up, and we want to let them have that opportunity. So now I'm going to pry in some more. So this has been a kind of unusual pattern of brood. Brood with food, honey mixed in. Which is probably just the queen laying where she can. There's more brood in the middle, surrounded by wax on the outside, or honey was what I mean, wet capped. More brood here in the middle, surrounded by more wet capped honey. And so the wet capping could just be that they're trying to pack as much in because of not having as much comb, or just they had a flow and so they were packing them, and again didn't have the space to draw out more. Okay, on the bottom of this frame, which is going to be the top to you, you can see some pollen in there. That's bee bread that the bees will mix pollen and nectar, and they feed that to the brood. So that's what's on the bottom. And then up in the top more, we had some larvae. And I'm just taking note every time, putting the frame back the way it was. And we're going to go in again, try to get the girls out of the way without smoking them, since they're doing such a fabulous job. It's always nice when you have nice bees. Okay, so here's probably the end of our brood. It's a lot of pollen here in the middle. So that's all food for the baby bees, and then all surrounded by honey, capped honey on the outside. And then this is all food here, all honey. So they're doing pretty good on stores. We'll keep going in. I may have missed the queen. We did see some eggs, so it's not that important that I find her. Although I kind of would like to find her just for the purpose of the video. This one's fairly heavy, so more honey. All capped honey, not completely drawn out in the corner there. And then more capped honey. So this right here is closer to a dry capped honey. The spots that aren't dark, that's more like what you would see. This is still a little bit on the wet capped side. and there's nothing that makes one better or worse. The dry capped looks more appealing. So if you're selling like comb honey, cut comb or Ross rounds, then that's probably more appealing to people. And we didn't see the queen. So that's more of what would be almost closer to a drier capped honey, right? And they're still working on that frame. So what I'm gonna do is scoot them over. I don't know, maybe I missed the queen. I didn't really start looking for her until we were probably halfway through the brood. So it's very possible that she could have been there and I just didn't see her. She should be marked. This one should have a yellow mark on her. And let's go ahead, we're just going, just gonna get them to go back down just a little bit, since we are, there we go. Didn't get stung. Thought I was, but okay, so here, if you can see, they're making a chain. I don't know if you can see that. In the middle, the bees are festooning together. So I'm gonna go ahead and push them back so I don't have to work so hard. Just being careful on these lips to make sure the bees get out of the way. So here's one that a bee jumped on me, and they'll do that if you move quick. So it's best to go as slow as you can. It didn't sting me. Okay, this is the one that had a lot of open cells. Just skimming through, looking for the queen. I won't spend too much time, but I will give it a little bit of effort. Should have done more towards the beginning. Don't see her on this other one that's in there already. So these capped cells, I don't know when they were capped, as far as how long ago, but on day 9 they get capped, and then on day 21 they emerge as worker bees. All of this is worker brood. It's flat. I didn't see drone brood in here, but the drone brood will protrude, little bubbles sticking out. It'll look similar. It'll just be a rounded, a lot of people compare it to like a 22 bullet sticking out of the frame. And those are drones. And drones are 28 days. So that's the frame with all the pollen. So that's the end of our brood. So now I'm just going to gently lower it down, and you want to kind of give your box a little wiggle left and right, and that'll get you to keep from crushing bees as easily. And there you have it. So hopefully we went over some things that are useful to you. We didn't see the queen. If you did happen to see the queen during your inspection or during my inspection, great job. You have a good eye. I wasn't picking up on it. But if you happen to see the queen, you want to just be real careful with the frame. You don't need to pick her up or anything. Just kind of be careful when you put her back in. Make sure that the frame's not rubbing up against the other frame, like assuming she's on this side. You don't want to put it close in to where she could rub up against the other wax or the other bees. You want to make sure there's enough space. So scoot your frames over, put it in, try to hug the other side, leave a good gap, and then you can scoot them together gently. So thank y'all for watching, and I hope you're enjoying beekeeping. Please leave a comment if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to leave. Always appreciate hearing from the viewers, and thank y'all for watching.